Thank you for
Yes.
the opportunity. I don't do too many interviews, but I'm very grateful that you did think to ask me. Thank you.
I am glad that you accepted my proposal. I've been a long time fan actually, since Enthralled to the Void of Bliss. First thing I want you to do is actually introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Matron Thorn. I am founder of multidisciplinary art platform, Esoteric Tradition. Um, I am founder of Evangelist, um, Benighted in Sodom slash Benzo, and it's quite difficult for me to actually introduce myself. Looking at it objectively, I don't know how I would describe myself.
Yeah.
I'm an artist, and the things that I make happen to fall under various classifications of. Sometimes the medium is music, sometimes it's film, sometimes it's writing. But I consider myself to be another crazy person. I concealed my face. I do this, and it triggers a lot of weird responses from people. I'm not sure why I do it, because of course it's a different thing to curate your own representation in something, for example, like a music video, which
Yeah.
I can be seen in or on stage or such things. But to do live interviews where I'm just speaking in real time, I figure I should answer everyone's wonder. Why did I choose to do that? This is actually, it's a sign of my humanity because I don't obviously present myself like this at work when I go to my job, when I'm among my family members and my friends who know me personally. I mean, my face is very Googleable. You can find
Yeah.
it. I am not at the moment speaking as, I'm not speaking as Ruben, which is my name, my human flesh prison name. I am speaking now as the creator of these things, as the artist, and then who I am is essentially what I look like. The face you can put to these words is irrelevant because of the things that I've created are much more than who I am.
Exactly. I totally get that. As you put it, as I see it, you're just a vessel for, the spirituality and the music that you bring forth, because it is not in terms, say, mundane, but it's higher. It's higher than all flesh and all that relates to matter, what you bring forth. So I understand the concealing of the face. That's my perception.
I think that you are correct. Your perception, I think, matches where I've seen your interest to be. That you are after truth, and I hope that during this dialogue I can give you answers that satisfy your curiosity beyond really surface level things. For a person wearing a veil over his face, I think I am a surprisingly realistic. But by all means, let's open this up.
The first question I want to ask, I'm not sure if anyone has asked you this before, but Evangelist, the name. What is the reason you chose the name for this project?
In the beginning of the earliest phases of writing, there was actually a different name. Heresis was the original name of the project, and the very first Evangelist song ever made, which was Crematorium and Gem from uh, the first album. It can actually be downloaded in some corners of the internet as Heresis because we wanted to choose something ideological but vague. I settled on the name Evangelist, though, because there's a dichotomy between expressing these very sinister things, but also wanting to weaponize the art itself. So, in the spirit of that, weaponizing the art, I considered what, universally, historically speaking, has been an effective weapon against the human race. And it is ideology, it's religion, the evangelism of
Yeah.
what, so to speak, the music was about, related directly to that was indoctrinating. It was something which, again, years ago when this all started, it was intended to be nightmarish and unsettling. It was never meant to even be played, in all honesty. It was just meant to be a transformative experience. Evangelism is transformative. You have different levels to that transformation and being consumed by faith, by belief. I've always admired the scenes of Christian evangelists, both on television and from my own personal experiences growing up in a very religious household, sort of. But I was exposed to religion quite heavily, beyond heavily, probably at an abnormal amount. I think even the most fervent believers of Christianity I've ever encountered in my life were still yet only subject to one environment, one perspective. And so they managed to sort of live normal lives unimpeded by this existential questioning that comes with that. I attended a Catholic private school for about a decade as a child, and then I got kicked out of there. And then I went to a Lutheran school, got kicked out of there. And then on the weekends, I went with my family to some Baptist church. So the Catholic school had Mass on Wednesdays. On Sundays, I would go with my family to Mount Olive Baptist Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Very, speaking of dichotomies, very interesting difference between the two. Catholic Mass was generally very regimented to just being a certain amount of time, like an hour, and you go there. It's very ritualistic. It's kind of masochistic, really, with how it was conducted. It's very ceremonial and it's very penitent. But then on Sunday at Southern Baptist Church, it was much more. It was elated. It was jovial. People danced. People spoke in tongues. They rolled on the floor. They yelled, and the service ended when it decided to end. So I took those experiences. Also, another group of people in my family were Presbyterian, and I went to church over the summer when I was growing up, and I'd go to spend some time at their place. And these things had a very influential effect on my relationship with concepts like spirituality. I realize I'm giving you quite a long answer to this one thing, but it should be clear to anybody who knows anything about what my artistic goals are, that there are no short answers to any of this. All of the things that I've made them with purpose and meaning. Every note I've played, every artwork used, chosen, created, every lyric written, all of it has a long story behind it. Understandably, it doesn't allow for immediate, instant understanding. That kind of art attracts me the most, is when something is sort of rejected by everyone. Then it becomes interesting to me. Much more concisely, I'll say that evangelist was the word is a word of significance, and it was chosen to convey an intent. It was an immediate statement of intent.
And would you say that is the vision of evangelism?
Well, yes and no. At the time, I think it was, in the very beginning, more oriented towards kind of a social agenda. I think we wanted to, at the time, okay, I'll say this way, our own judgment, I think, was clouded by the allure of being seen. I can't tell you that it started with a clear definition to the things that would follow. When we made the first album, we didn't anticipate Enthralled to the Void of Bliss later, or Charismata today, or anything. We simply made it because we could. And the purpose of Evangelist became much clearer later. I think the purpose is very much the same as with all of the others. All of the other projects, they all belong to the same multiverse of expression. These things, they contain the DNA of the same muse that's channeled, that's brought manifest through the art in whatever capacity and ability my nearest human limitations would allow, as merely the brush held by the divine hand that guides every stroke. And That might sound quite esoteric. It is esoteric, though. I can't talk about these things in casualities. I can't regard something which I hold so close to who I am and what I truly feel and believe. I can't speak about it with anything but the highest regard, veneration. We're dealing with powers and principalities and insight that goes beyond what we have the ability to describe. I think the impetus to create, it comes with this dissatisfaction, this sort of incompleteness you could feel from trying to articulate that which can't be articulated. I can't tell you that there are magical books or writings or rituals or things that I can ascribe for me personally, and it's those who do. But for me personally, I can't describe a relationship between that and what occurs to me on a divine level, because I think it is quite similar to how Jewish people in the Talmud define God. It's something I think is very reasonable, that God is unknowable. He's indifferent. It is indifferent. She, whatever. It's not something that I have any right to define, say absolutely is or isn't anything. And I'm not foolish or arrogant enough to think that my role in any of this truly means anything. All I have is my own subjective reality. I create from that reality, and I create thereby. Maybe these things created through me, in spite of me. It happens in a form I can only describe as being magical. I would describe it that way. So, long story short, pursue the esoteric. The esoteric tradition is exactly making the esoteric.
You just released a new album, which you described as the final and ultimate form of matricide in the Temple of Omega. Would you care to explain the meaning and vision behind this?
Back in 2017, the music for Matricide was written, and that was when I was still living in Portland, Oregon. It was a dark time, and it was around that same time that Dream and Evil Dream 2 was also created. I think Dream and Evil Dream 2 happened sort of coinciding with our first, or with the first ever California Death Fest, which we played at. For me personally, it was a poignant but very dark time. The music for Mattress started to come together then, but it didn't get released until 2018. There were difficulties. No need to really tiptoe around it, but to keep it short, the relationships within the band started to deteriorate. So it took a long time for it to get finished. On my side of things, there were very mundane sort of technical problems with the recording, and the music was very important to me. The music was a bit different in its conception from the other albums. I mean, obviously, all of the albums they came together quite differently. Came together to form a more black metal approach to, had been previously more death metal. I took a lot of these influences during the writing process from unusual places. Notably, the final riff of the album, and ascending into the pantheon, that was a slight rewrite of a segment from a theme from a Disney film. I changed it, and it made sense at the end. It's one of my favorite riffs I've ever written, and it's most helpful to the listener if I don't explain fully what it is that they are that's being transmitted to them. If I don't give them the whole picture, they make the picture for themselves. It forces them
Yeah.
psychologically to create their own investment in the experience. And I can tell you that the titles, everything I've ever chosen for any project, is especially on a linguistic level, on a literary level, is all very important. It's all a clue or a key or a window to something else. It could even suffice to say that every one of the projects has a path to the others. There is some link between Evangelist and Death Fetishist, or between Evangelist and Benzo and Disenchantra. These are all orbiting in the same universe. So with charismata are gifts, divine gifts. It's a thing that you can do. And my favorite one is the gift of discernment. I read a lot about this from Catholic tradition. It's believed that God grants people the gift of discernment in order to recognize true good or true evil. Whether or not, that's an actual occurrence is subjective entirely to what you believe. However, if we look at the Bible, if we look at things like that, these are interpretations of perhaps very understandable, very rational ideas, but they're interpreted via myth and mysticism, because in those times, that's all they had. They didn't have things like science and observational logic to help them interpret the events and phenomenon around them. There's a science fiction writer who is widely considered to be a hack, who is widely considered to be kind of a goofball, but his name is Zechariah Sitchin. And he said something very interesting to me, which is that, and perhaps it's in the book of Deuteronomy, but it's noticed that flaming chariots were going up into the sky, and he posited this idea, kind of consistent with the whole ancient aliens thing, that, well, we knew that the ancient Egyptians had hydraulic mechanisms and such, that maybe what they were actually seeing were some literal primitive form of rockets going up into the sky. Whether or not that's actually the case, I'll leave that to anyone to decide for themselves. It was just an interesting thing to read. But what it said to me was that it's possible that certain ideas, being able to discern good and evil, was actually some other very perhaps modern kind of idea interpreted that way then. Being able to recognize good and evil might have been consistent with some kind of empathy, to be people who were empaths. You have, of course, two ends of that spectrum. You have empaths, and then you have psychopaths. Sociopaths are somewhere in there too, where their empathy is entirely selective. They turn it off when they need to. And empaths recognize when people can do that, and they don't trust. They don't trust each other. In any case, this sort of miasma of ideas and concepts, these are the kinds of things I'll ruminate over until I drive myself fucking crazy, and then I start writing. So the music comes out, and then it connects to these sort of unspoken ideas and vagaries. It's best to speak about art in vagaries, or in pure circumstance, how it makes you feel. It's best to not really explain it.
Yeah.
I can tell you, though, that like everything else, like all the other projects, the origin emotionally it comes from that same divine source. And this is an interpretation of one corner, one angle of these, the form that the muse chooses to take this time, the great muse. So Charismata was re-recorded recently, completely anew, with live drums and the instruments, everything was entirely redone. There were a few sections that I could say that I slightly rewrote them, but I could also describe it as just augmented them. And of course, Stefan added his vocal
Yeah.
performance, which is perhaps his best yet. But that there is more to come. This is an album that we were quite pleased to finish and release, but we have more quite soon. Yes.
You're involved in a lot of projects, a lot. Benighted in Sodom, Hex Arcana, Death Fetishist, Evangelist, etc., just to name a few. I wanted to know, what is the inspiration? What keeps this flame burning? What fuels your fire?
I might say there is a need to create that goes beyond, I think, mundane reasons. What I consider to be mundane reasons to create. Bad reasons. The mundane reasons are the bad reasons. You might notice that unless an album is specifically sanctioned and released through a label such as I Void Him, he releases great stuff, he's a man of taste and prestige like myself, then those albums are usually promoted a lot. And via Esoteric Tradition, we do a certain level of promotion musically, but the thing about it is this: I know that the people who have listened to my music for since I started, since I emerged and people knew my name, that's almost 20 years. They have always been around and they always will be. And I don't feel the need to cheapen something which is infinitely more valuable, infinitely greater than, having this like name brand recognition. I'm not selling out Madison Square Garden, and I'm not exploding into the mainstream. I don't wish to disparage anyone who does those things. I think a lot of those are really great things. It's just where it comes back to your question. My ambitions lie somewhere else. The creating of the art by whatever means necessary. It is the utmost thing. It is truly the utmost thing. I recorded The Universe is a Very Gloomy Place by Benighted in Sodom in an alley when I didn't have a place to live at the time. I was in an alley between two crack houses, and the music from a very dark place came together, and I had instruments. There was access to electricity. I had what I needed to make the art. I didn't expect to make social media posts where I hype it up. It didn't matter. I just needed it to be made. And there are some things that are embedded in that music that are unspeakable. They're tragic and sad things. It was one of several moments in time where I had no certainty that things would work out. I was in this alley recording this album, and that was all there was at the time. That was the utmost thing. And therefore, I record music to get into touch, to receive these emanations from that place that I can't explain. The source. The source is pure. It is the same source which, if you don't necessarily make art, I think you subscribe to a religion. And then here we go back to, will you weaponize those emanations that you receive through religion, or will you harness it and use it to better yourself? And so we know the insidious nature of those who weaponize those emanations. They are the originators of organized religion. And so you have organized religion, and you have the hive mind assimilation that it wants from all of us. And really, religion is not meant to be shared. It's not meant to be a collective experience or a group thing. It's so personal. You never talk about it with anyone. Never share your prayers or whatever it is you do. If you have a belief in something, you keep it close to you. It's sacred. And another person can't assume your point of view. They can't.
Yeah.
It's not possible for them to experience your subjective reality. The things that you come to believe are shaped by the memories that you forge from the things that occur in your life. It kind of it transcends a bit to this sort of nature and nurture kind of thing. But the most important thing is to just create the art genuinely. You see, if you are creating genuine art, then the source, it inspires you constantly. It's only when you dilute that source, when you dampen it with the trivial necessities of the surface world, of the things, the superficial. I think I've heard many times, like, wow, this would be so great if you had this expensive production. You know what? I don't have anything against people who do that. And in fact, the Scrying Mirror album was produced professionally by a friend of mine, a good friend who's very talented, named Ross Colvin, which people should hire him to work on their music too, because he's very nice. He is a very clever chap. But everyone else is welcome to do what they want. I create what resonates within me specifically. I don't have any problem with the production of anything that I make. It sounds the way it sounds because I want it to. And it isn't about putting my feet or making my mark or placing a flag into any classification or genre. I don't need to belong to any of that shit. I just want to create things that are truly of what I experience when I'm receiving those emanations from the source. And it's not always going to be like produced by fucking Rick Rubin or anything. It's me. And I don't need to mystify it. I make my music in my small studio, and it's not especially interesting. It's mundane because I am a mundane flesh prison vessel for this strange bit of inspiration. I think different things inspire me. Different things. I use these like transmissions from that divine source, and I change how they're framed. Disenchantra, for example, is one of my other projects, and it's very experimental. The music is almost entirely inspired by sort of my feelings about different women. And I don't think that that's a trivial or small thing, because I think the inspiration that comes from certain very intense emotions like infatuation or lust, I think these things are fertile for writing music, and men and women have done that for as long as music has existed.
There was an interesting thing that you said about genre. Not to say that you are stuck in defining yourself as a certain genre, like maybe black metal or death metal, whatever. It's a good thing that you don't think that way, because I know there's a lot of artists that think this way, and when thinking that way, you are confining yourself, you're restricting yourself from actually pushing forward,
I agree.
right?
I agree. It's interesting that there are some bands that I liked when I was younger, who to me at the time felt so meaningful. They felt so convicted to the art that they made, and other people noticed that too. And I think that's how they became very successful. The problem, though, is that the intent changes. Art comes down to intent. This is a thing that Stefan and I have agreed on. We've had some interesting discussions. Stefan, the vocalist, the evangelist, and it does come down to intent. When that changes, then what you're doing stops being art. Then it becomes commodity. It becomes a product. I've used this example with people in the past, and I don't mean to throw shade, but Behemoth. I used to really like that band. I think I've actually seen them live more than any other band. When I was a teenager, I thought they were really, really rocking. And I met Nurgle when they arrived on a tiny bus, barely a bus. Their performance, they didn't wear a lot of these like costumes and things. They had like a getup, but it was modest. They were still a bit green as far as appearing live. I think I've seen performances where they were not necessarily on their A game, but I enjoyed it because there was something humble and profoundly understated about them back then. It's a vast contrast to the entity the band is now. But I know that the livelihoods of these musicians has been transferred from day jobs when they were a much smaller band to now the band. It is now the livelihood. And look, if you can do that, if you can pay your bills and be a rock and roll singer, that's really cool. Good for you. But I will never accept that you are not trying to sell me something. It feels a lot shallower now, which is too bad, because I do genuinely think they're good musicians. I don't need any more things telling me that they are satanic. I have my own understanding of what being satanic entails and what it means. And usually when something tells me that it is, I don't believe it. I think the things that are very satanic in the sense as I understand it, they don't have to tell me. They speak for themselves. I think if you need to sell me ideas like killing Christians and doing this and doing that, these things are all very mundane. I don't think anybody needs me to go too deep into this about Behemoth. Everyone who's a part of the microcosm of individuals who think about things like this, they all already know. And look, like I said, I do not disparage anything that they do or anybody. Everybody's doing what suits their own agenda, as am I. And my agenda is pretty much that I'll be dead. And my music will not have been played on radio stations. I won't be a household name. I'll die probably a relatively obscure artist, and someone will have burnt CDRs of different things that I made. So then later in the future, hundreds of years, in some attic, someone will find it, and then they'll listen, and maybe they'll hate it, or maybe they will marvel and like it. I don't know. That is my agenda as an artist, is to be appreciated by that small cabal of loyal people who have been around 20 years, like I said, those people. And it won't matter who I was. They're not going to look for my face, as you see. They're going to listen to the CDs, to whatever it is. And I think to die unknown and let your art speak for itself, to leave it as your own monument, that is the true high aspiration of an artist. It isn't fame or success. It's that your shrine is hidden in the wilderness, and someone has to trespass and traverse some dangerous territory just to come across it one time. And then they will either reject it completely, or they will instantly be converted and know that you were genuine.
At what age did you start showing an interest in creating music?
Well, I've always liked music. In my household, I was not allowed to listen to lots of things. I, I think my family hated rock music.
Yeah.
I think I think they hated a lot of things, but my uncle was a jazz piano player. He's a interesting individual. We didn't have the best relationship growing up, but your environment, your circumstances play a role in your development as a human being. And I was around him as he played his piano, and I inadvertently acquired many of his habits, which I think was the sort of the fertilization of the soil of my own creative territory. Where it really got interesting was when I was a teenager and I did get my first instruments. They were cheap. Everything has always been quite cheap. Nowadays, I have some stuff that's a bit more sophisticated, but back then I grew up poor. So having a guitar of any kind, the first one I actually played was one from church that we borrowed. And the first notes I ever wrote were on that guitar. But then did a huge leap after that and asked my mom to buy me a BC Rich Warlock. It was like platinum edition. Yeah, it was cool. I thought it was cool because it was shaped like devil horns and all that, and it was guaranteed to upset them,
Yeah.
which made it even more awesome. I went to a pawn shop and I got a PC. So the first experiments I made were with Windows Sound Recorder. That was my first DAW, D-A-W.
Yeah.
Windows Sound Recorder. You might remember you hit record and then it only records for 60 seconds. Oh, good times. And I made some awful shit with that, and I loved it. And I think if my son wanted to make music, I'd probably start him with something like that too. See, when you're deprived, you don't need to you don't need to trouble yourself with things like production and perfection. You use what you have. As I said before, make the art any way you can. I had at times I pirated a lot of software. I stole things, not in a. I didn't steal from friends, but I shoplifted from some stores to get parts that I needed, cords and things that who cares. I stole them and I used them to plug in my guitars and make music. The first Benighted and Sodom albums, I don't know how much they're listened to nowadays, but those were the first pieces of music I made where I felt I had really accomplished something. Plague Overlord, then in Horror Maledictus 1, 2, and once I got started, I never stopped. And so I think I was about 11 when I first started to hear the calling from out there in the yonder that I should create something. And again, people will perhaps hear me say stuff like that. As has happened many times, I think they want to explain it away as I'm pretentious, or I want people to take me seriously. I don't really. I don't expect anybody to. And if I do sound pretentious, I think that's good, because that means that you're sane and that what I'm saying is having the desired effect. It's meant to sound grandiose, because it is. The things that I'm talking about, my humble beginnings, my creating with limited resources, all of these things are, this was that type of thing, in my opinion. That's the stroke of divinity. That's where it comes from. It isn't this grandiose mystical thing that happens. Sometimes it's a pawn shop in Fort Lauderdale,
Yeah.
Florida, with a PC. Recognize later the connections, the stones that were set for you to walk on until they formed a path, and here you are.
What are some of your favorite artists and musicians of all time?
It may be surprising to hear. I don't listen to a lot of new things. I don't listen. I think the same few albums and artists that I've liked for years. It's never really changed, and even for them, I don't like every single thing they've made. The first thing that comes to mind, I'll mention "The Burning Circle and Then Dust" by Lycia. I love that album. It's one of the only albums I can put on and listen to from start to finish. It's quite long too. I think it's a double album actually, but it's an achievement, it's a triumph in themes and aesthetics and dark wave, ethereal music. Um, Many emotions and atmospheres that I personally relate to can be found in that single album. I like some of their other music, but that album, The Burning Circle and Then Dust, is the only one which I make sure I have available to me at all times. It's been on every iPod I've ever owned. Everywhere I've been, everywhere I've lived, I've had that album with me in some form. I might mention Dead Z. I really like that band from the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. Elijah Blue Allman, son of Cher and Greg Allman. Again, a triumph of themes and execution. There are things that they did that were so ahead of their time. Emptiness from Belgium. Jeremy is a friend of mine. Emptiness is one of the only current modern bands that I personally would describe as groundbreaking. It's rare that you listen to something and think this these these people are onto something. They've got it. They understand. I consider their album Not for Music to be one of my favorite albums ever of all time. Again, it's one that I've kept close to me. And if we're talking about black metal, much to people's dismay, I've mentioned Tabernaculum by Rebirth of Nefast from uh, Iceland/Ireland. The guys from Ireland, Stephen. That's a really great album. It's a lengthy listen, but it's so cinematic and atmospheric. It's sort of, to me, on a level of if Hans Zimmer made black metal. That is where I would probably place that. And I think it's one of the best black metal albums to happen within the past 10 years. Um,
I agree. I agree.
it's untouchable. Um, I, you know, we did Evangelist did a split with Bluthaus Nord a long time ago, which was a very significant moment for us. And for me personally, it was. I'd always admired um, Vincent and what he does. But I'm not going to lie, I have not, like I said, I don't really listen to a lot of new things. I haven't followed it as closely as I think other people have. I'm happy, of course, to see his appeal and success. I completely understand. It's very inspired what he's able to do. Where Bluthaus Nord is concerned, though, Memoria Vestus, the second one, that and the work which transforms God and the split with Phobos, I think, are essential. Ultima Thule, his first album when he was a teenager, there's some pretty incredible stuff on that too. I think if I was to direct someone to listen to Bluthaus Nord, I'd tell them to start there. Maybe I'd throw in Odinist also, and Mort if I suspect that they might imbibe some alcohol or something while they're listening. Richard Patrick from Filter, 90s rock band. Their album Title of Record is another one of my favorite albums of all time. Richard Patrick got his start as guitarist for Nine Inch Nails, who I do really like. But look, let's be real. Not everything by Nine Inch Nails is like gold. They've got some obviously untouchable, legendary type of types of albums, absolutely. But Filter um, appealed to me much more. The melody and uh, Brian Lee's gang, his guitar player, had, his chord structures I've always loved. There's something in the melody and these augmented ninths that he plays that speaks to me. I really like that. Going back to black metal, Salvation, Funeral Mist, Essential. I think another one of the greatest black metal albums ever recorded. I don't know what it is about Sweden, but they managed to.
Yeah.
They've got some kind of musical sensibility that seems to extend to any genre of music, whether you're listening to ABBA or you're listening to Onskapt. It's all seemingly written into their lineage. I'm tempted to mention, when I lived in Portland, I had a chance to jam a bit with Rest from Leviathan. He lived pretty close to me, and we had a few jam sessions and we played music. And when I go and listen to them, they're just crude recordings I made on my phone. It's really interesting stuff that we came up together. Sometimes I played guitar and bass, and he played drums. Sometimes the other way around. Most of the time he played drums, which if you've ever heard him play drums, it's completely understandable. But Jeff is definitely a very talented individual, and there's something about him as a person that I think extends much deeper into the art that he makes than I think is immediately perceptible unless you know him. But I guess one thing I did admire most was that it felt like, again, he was genuinely a real artist. He made things that were consistent with the characterization of who he is. Qualities of him are very finely embedded in the music that he made. And so I might mention Scar-Sighted. I of course, really got into 10th Sublevel and Tentacles of Horror and Massive Conspiracy, all of those, the classic shit. When I was younger, Scar-Sighted seemed to be this culmination of things that had been leading up to it since those times, and I really liked that. I guess the last one I might say, Eosoth from France, the album, what was it? An Arrow in Heart. Very atmospheric, very experimental. So, you know, I'm prepared to receive a bit of hate for saying this, but I kind of put it on the same level as Issues by Korn. Um, Hear me out.
I'm listening.
It's just that I think that where Korn was kind of, they were kind of dismissed for their antics involving experimental hip hop things and their image and all of this stuff. That one album, Issues, was like a freak accident in industrial metal. It is one of the best industrial metal albums I've ever heard. Never mind whether or not it's new metal or this or that. As an industrial metal album, it's great. And there are things that happen on An Arrow in Heart that are at least peripherally similar to what happens if we're talking about the guitars, to what happens on Issues. I'll give you whatever distaste for what I've said, but I am totally willing to die on the hill that Issues is one of the best industrial rock albums ever made, and it's great. I'm not saying I think Aosoth is like Korn,
Yeah.
but I think that there is a captured magic to both of them that kind of hits a bit of the same resonances in me. So it's entirely a compliment. I think BST is a really good songwriter. Also got to mention Consolamentum by Ascension.
Mm.
Every time someone writes about their album of the year and they ask me for mine, I tell them the same thing every year. It's Consolamentum by Ascension. Because great as their entire discography is, nothing has ever surpassed that they did. And I know that some members were sort of involved with Catharsis, which I like as well.
Mm.
But Consolamentum, perfect album on all accounts. I love the vocals. I love this very strict adherence to very traditional rock and roll sort of musical conventions, while at the same time successfully being more of a black metal album than black metal albums usually are.
Yeah.
It feels very passionate. Maybe it's something to do with I don't know, the construction of the songs, the lyrics. It feels like rock and roll with a deeply dark, really like spiritual purpose. So those would be the ones that I would name off the top of my head. I probably could go on, but we'll keep it there. Keep it nice and tidy with those.
Perfect.
Come and find me. Come and find me. Come and find me. Come and find me. Come and find me.
Flesh traders on the dark web, buying and selling, that's all they do.
Come and
You can get a slave, and a friend.
find me.
That's what it's about for
Come
The
and
fuck me up
find
club,
me.
artists.
Come and
They bought
find
you
me.
because you're a materialist. And they stripped you. And they fucked you. They'll cut you up. They play material sides. They found it.
Come and find me.
They didn't just fuck you. They fucked your soul. That was the art. That was the real stuff.
But we had stepped into a night. We had stepped into hell.
Come and find me.
You recently, okay, it was a few months back that you gave us the first episode of your film series, User Unknown. Is this something you always wanted to do, or?
I've always had a passion for film and for cinematic qualities in music and in art. I find cinema to be evocative in a way that is very complete. It's also quite daring. You see, if you take a picture and it has cinematic qualities, the thing that makes it cinematic is that at first impression, it gives you a sense of narrative, of storytelling. And music, of course, can do that. You have to know how, and not everything does. But if someone takes a photograph, the composition of the photograph is what gives the narrative. It tells the story. And I've had a lot of these sensibilities about that, and I know why. I know exactly why I like the things that I like. Then the albums that I just mentioned that I've liked, I know exactly what about them appeals to me. I could break down every single feature and quality of each one that I've mentioned. Everything, music, lyrics, aesthetics, artistic representation, everything could be quantified at least up to the point where I can tell you how it relates to my own tastes. And so with making a film, it was a challenge to evoke the sort of emotional content that is in my music, the darkness in the music, and to coalesce that into something that can be sort of three-dimensionally consumed. that had this depth beyond just what you hear. Now it's what you see, it's what you interpret. It was a chance to give meaning to all of these other different aspects of it. And there are things going on in the episode, in the scenes, which, I mean, to the untrained eye are perhaps meaningless, but everything is connected. There's a lot of symbolism, even besides the scenes that are, of course, outright sort of an art house atmosphere approach to the editing and incorporation of seemingly unrelated vignettes and things like that. It goes beyond that. Where I've been able to give meaning to things, I could also create relationships between things from scene to scene. The actors, these were not real actors. These are people that I know. They were my friends. They are my friends. They will be involved in future episodes as well. Therefore, they did not have any acting experience. All of this, apologies if this sounds like a brag, but it had to lean on the strength of the directing and the writing and the sound design, because I knew exactly what I wanted them to do. So I was able to articulate precisely how they should deliver each line, where they should pause. I could tell them things like, in this scene with this sentence, you are not supposed to sound certain. You must, the way the audience must feel is uncertain. They must feel a sense of intrigue, but also fear, because you are describing something that is forbidden to you. So the trepidation in your voice must be somewhat clear. You'll waver a bit. You'll hesitate. It's trying to hide in your throat, but you are choosing how to bring it out. So I gave them instruction, and they did amazing, all of them. And we had a screening of the film at my house after it was done, and all of the cast and the crew were invited to watch. And we watched it for the first time together, and I think, well, I know that they were quite moved from what they said. And I'm grateful that these individuals gave me their time and they trusted my process. That's the key thing. They must trust the process. So now that the first episode is done, the next thing is episode 2, of which more will be known quite soon. Esoteric Tradition is also in the early stages of planning our first feature-length film, something with a much higher budget, and it will include the actors from User Unknown. They are a part of the Esoteric Tradition fraternity, I guess you could call it. And so them and others will participate in the feature-length film. I've made music videos which can be seen on my YouTube channel, and those were the earliest experiments with visuals and music and everything. They're all very close to my heart as well, and I highly recommend if one is interested to watch the videos on my YouTube channel, not to start with the music videos exactly, but there are 3 in particular: Veil, Promise, and Foreshadowing. These 3 videos were kind of conceived as a mission statement for Esoteric Tradition when they were made. And I think they'll stoke the fires of interest a bit for anybody. But yes.
That was actually my next question. What is the vision of Esoteric Tradition? But I'll leave it at that unless you want to add on to it, because you mentioned the 3 videos,
Yes.
which is the mission statement. So if you want to add on to that, what the vision of Esoteric Tradition is, then you can. But if not, if you feel we are redundant, we're repeating ourselves now, then we can just move on.
I think the only thing I have to add to it is that there is an end game. There is something specific, something tangible that we are after. And it will be known in time. And I think that's it that I have to say about that.
So, what is next for you? Any other projects you're working on behind the scenes besides User Unknown? Any other projects?
Yes, I have been offered a book deal, and my book, the first book in my book trilogy, will be released likely by the end of the year 2023. My book is called The Sainthood. And as I said, it is a trilogy, so this is The Sainthood, Book 1. I am in the process of editing it now. It is a novel of about 400 or so pages, and it is I might loosely define it as a cyberpunk, neo-noir fantasy epic. Emphasis on world building, spanning across time and space. There are elements to it that are deeply philosophical, but it took a long time to write. It's 400 pages, so it's best if I rather say as little about it as possible, to leave it up to individual interpretation. It's maybe less interpretive than music, which depends heavily on your own perception of what's happening, because it's a book. But there's quite a bit to the story that it would demand a very lengthy explanation, a very lengthy bit of exposition, which I think is best saved for the book to offer you itself. And that is the next thing. When the book is out, I will do a small book tour, but I won't just read from the book. My project, Rust-Colored Glasses, it's this similarly themed cyberpunk cinematic atmospheric music project where much of it has been written directly about things from the Sainthood. We will perform the songs as passages from the book are read, sort of to create a soundtrack to the reading, if you can imagine. Maybe perhaps similar to John Carpenter. He performed a lot of his soundtracks, something a bit like that. Probably should have even included earlier Perdition City by Ulver. Here I go again fishing for hate comments, but Perdition City is the best Ulver album, and I am not sorry about saying that one. I think it's the best album because it's the album most directly relevant to my own experiences. So I can't universally say for everyone it should be the best album to you. I won't say that.
And
it's only on my behalf that I think that.
Yeah, and that's the thing with art, music. That's the thing. It's not always going to be the same for everyone. Just because someone says that this and that is the best, it's always perception and experience and what resonates with you.
Yes, I agree.
Anything you would like to say to the fans of your music?
I'd just like to reiterate that I am grateful for the support that I am given. I am grateful for the appreciation of what I do. And I understand, I don't expect everybody to like everything that I make. I mean, I make it for myself. I could be without access to the internet for the rest of my life, and I would still be creating these things. They would be created in the vacuum, the perfection of the vacuum, and that's all perfectly fine with me. But to those who have taken the time, the years, spending money, investing in what I've done, it's very meaningful. It's not like I can just, I'll put it this way. Um, my music's not marketed very much because it's mostly not marketable. And so whenever I notice that people have really sat and listened, it's very meaningful. When people write reviews, I know I haven't made it easy on them to understand what it's about. So the reviews, rare as they are, it means that they actually sat and listened and took the time. And that's valuable to me. I don't think uh, everything I do is likable or has immediate appeal to people. So I know that the few people who do come around and leave comments on YouTube or on Bandcamp or send me emails, you know, I know that they genuinely appreciate it because I know I didn't make it easy. And I'm grateful to all of you. So thank you. And when you find that music in that attic in the future, just keep it to yourself. And I think that's everything I have to say.
So, okay, do you have advice for any individuals that want to start bands or black metal projects or any projects in general?
I would say to just create genuinely. And the most interesting things that you make will likely be the things that are rejected, the things that people dislike the most, the things which are fundamentally, categorically unmarketable. And I think you should love those things because they are, well, they are positive moments in time for what you create. They give definition to the characterization of you. Their imperfections, don't worry about making productions that sound like this band or this band or playing to anybody's standards. People mostly have awful taste. People adore crap. Most people are fucking terrible. You don't want the approval of like everybody because that's going to just dilute the magic in what you do. Challenge them, challenge yourself. I think that's my best advice.
Perfect. So that's all we have. Once again, I want to say thank you for accepting this interview, and final words belong to you. Anything you would like to say?
See you at Disneyland.